We're the only faculty in Ontario that combines traditional liberal arts with professional studies. Here, you can combine any number of programs as double majors or majors and minors. Interested in philosophy and administrative studies? You can do that here.
Nowhere else in the GTA can you find a more diverse and inclusive faculty. LANPS's culture is varied and vibrant. Our students are engaged in important equity work and community engagement.
The opportunities for academic and personal growth are unmatched at LAFBS. As an international student, I have found a home among my peers. I've taken part in clubs, research projects, and important outreach activities.
LANPS has many opportunities for internships and work placements to help enhance your in-class learning. I've been working as McLaughlin College's Peer Mentor Network Coordinator, and it's preparing me for what comes after graduation.
Our faculty is at the forefront of institutional change. This year, I was appointed as Special Advisor on LANPS's anti-Black racism strategy, so we can begin meaningful and hard conversations about equity and anti-Black racism in our communities.
As a proud York graduate, I credit my professors and peers for an excellent education. I gained a sense of self and a lifelong love of learning.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Liberal Arts and Professional Studies program chat. Today, we're going to be talking about one of our largest and most robust programs here at the university, which is our interdisciplinary social science program. Before we get started about talking a little bit more about that program, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that York University is located on. This meeting is virtual, and because of that, we are not all actually gathered in the same space. York's land acknowledgement might not represent the territory that you are currently on, and it would ask that if that is the case, that you each take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and its current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been taken care of by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now I'd like to introduce a very special guest we have with us today, the undergraduate program director for the Interdisciplinary Social Science program, Professor Paul Baxter. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. It's nice to be here and to talk about interdisciplinary social science.
And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your background and how long you've been here with the university.
I've been at York University since 2005. I started as a contract worker, and now I'm a full-time professor. I teach in the ISS program, and I also teach in criminology, and right now I'm doing the administrative role of undergraduate program director. My areas of interest, I have two very different areas of interest, and they're both manifest in ISS. One of them, and this is where I started in criminology, I have an interest in Indigenous peoples and restorative justice and Indigenous policing in issues like that. And that's how I started here at York, teaching about that to the criminology students. My other area of interest, and what I was actually formally trained in, is political theory. And that in that field, my primary interest nowadays is and concerns is really about what it means to be a citizen in a post-truth world. So I'm very interested in the origins of the relativity of truth, the increasing irrelevance of truth, particularly in public affairs. And there are both broadly social origins to that problem, but there are also philosophical origins to it. And so in ISS, I teach a fourth year course called Skepticism and Social Inquiry, where although it sounds like a very highfalutin sort of title for the course, what we're really looking at is the problem of post-truth, anti-intellectualism, anti-science in popular culture, and the origins of those problems. So my background is kind of, I got to York on along a sort of a strange path, but I'm also sort of living proof that you don't have to go through fixed disciplinary ways of studying in order to make your way in the professional world.
That's fantastic. And those are really interesting topics. And, you know, one of the things that strikes me is I can see a connection between those two areas, but they are also quite different in a lot of ways. And I was wondering how you could talk, if you could talk a little bit more about our social science program, about the study of social science at York, and the kind of topics that encapsulates.
Yes, I mean, I'm happy to. The ISS program is very unique in the sense that, and we are currently going through some significant curriculum renewal in that program. But this is a program that it's really for students who aren't entirely sure what they want to do. And what ISS offers is a broad range of courses and subjects through which a person can develop their intellectual curiosity and their interests. So ISS has 3 streams. They're not formal. They are formal streams, but they're not in the curricular sense, in the sense that, you know, in order to register, you must take 2 of 3 streams and you must have a certain number of courses from each stream. They're more like signposts or guides to lead you through the program. And those three are self, culture, and society. That's the first stream. Land, food, and climate justice is the second stream. And the third stream is social theory and method. And these streams will cross each other, and students following these streams will cross, throughout their career. Self, culture, and society is a very interesting stream, and it's one that I'm particularly interested in because it's sort of premised on the idea that one, I mean, as Shakespeare said, know thyself, that one starts from a sense of, if one knows oneself and one's goals and examines one's own values, one's own knowledge, then one becomes a better citizen. And in the self, culture, and society stream, and all of our program courses start at the second year, we look at a number of issues in the second year course, ideology in everyday life. Professor John Similides, who is an old friend and a wonderful person, he asked people to examine what they believe and why they believe what they believe. Do they align themselves with a particular ideology? Or is ideology too formal a thing to account for people's beliefs? And then there are a number of other second year courses too. Critical study of health and society, labor relations in Canada, workplace diversity, where we ask people to look in different ways about how they situate themselves in relationship to other people in the workplace. How do they understand about issues like care of the self and care of others in terms of healthcare, and larger justice issues around labor relations? Right? What's fair in a capitalist society? What is fair? Are workplaces fair now? Could they be better? How do we go forward as citizens? And then in the third year, we continue this process of self-examination. So in the third year, again, we have 3 more courses. My course, SOCH 3007, is called Colonialism and Reconciliation in Settler Societies. And I start that course by asking students a question about themselves. What does it mean to you to be a settler? And to acknowledge that you're a settler on this land. We just did the land acknowledgement when we started this talk. What are the implications of that? And once one learns what colonialism was all about, and one learns the history of, say, the forced assimilation of Indigenous peoples in the residential schools and so on. Once one knows what happened, how does one take responsibility for what happened? And the premise of that is again, rooted in one's moral compass, right? I argue quite vigorously, and I'm going to try to keep it limited for this little talk, but I argue that reconciliation is not possible in this country if the settler portion of the population isn't willing and ready to reconcile and to do what's necessary to achieve reconciliation. And so I look at this because obviously I'm not an Indigenous person. As I tell my students, I'm whiter than Casper the Ghost, and I know it. I'm actually the descendant of settlers because my family settled here in the 1830s as part of the tail end of the Scottish clearances. And I have to take responsibility for that historical legacy. And people have to sort of acknowledge this in different ways. So my course is really about that, right? Again, it's an intense course because we deal with all sorts of issues across North America primarily. I can't talk about everything, but the other part of this that requires reconciliation is of course the legacy of slavery, and I try to build that into it as well. But that all, again, is rooted back in the self. And then we talk, and then there are other courses, 2 of them that are core courses: Body, Power, and Society, and Disability and Race. And Body, Power, and Society is really an interesting course that's rooted in the philosophy of Michel Foucault, and looks at the ways in which power relations work themselves out, and as Foucault said, are imprinted on the body in a modern society. Disability and Race is a new course. It's one of the new courses that we're bringing online in ISS. And that course is noteworthy because it really does start out from what we call an intersectional perspective, right? And in this sense, the intersection of disability and race, and it examines the sort of differential treatment that racialized people with disabilities receive in our society. It's a very interesting course. It's one, again, that touches on justice. It touches on fundamental moral questions about, is this right? We also have other courses: Radical Ideas and Ideologies in the Modern Age, and Subjectivities of the Subaltern. Now, I'll say something about that last course because, and I know I might be talking too much, but the last course, Subjectivities of the Subaltern, is taught by my friend and colleague, Professor Nalini Persram. And her work is absolutely fascinating. Her research base is India. And where my course focuses on North America and colonialism and the impact of colonialism in North America, her course looks at the impact of colonialism in other parts of the world, particularly with a particular focus on India. And it is a wonderful and fascinating course that might get people thinking about parts of the world that they never thought of before. Professor Perstrom is a brilliant theorist and a wonderful person. I could talk to her for hours, but of course nobody has time for that. So, and then we have extensive extended list, which we're trying to cut down because we want people to focus on our program. And then there are fourth year courses as well, which need a little bit more development in our program, but there's my fourth year course, Skepticism and Social Inquiry, which touches on the theory stream. And there are some other fourth year courses as well. One fourth year course, there are a couple that we have on the books, but the main fourth year seminar, the capstone course for this, is taught by my friend and colleague Matthew Tegelberg, and it's called Critical Issues in Tourism Studies. And I mean, a person might say, what in the world does tourism have to do with self-culture and society? But when one thinks about tourism, right, the average tourist, right, is the epitome of a culture vulture, right? I mean, we go off to tour other countries to look at them. And in some ways, for many years, tourism was sort of a process of objectifying and commodifying the rich history of other cultures. You go to France, look at the Eiffel Tower, go to the Louvre, right? I mean, and hit all of these benchmarks, but all of those sort of capstone places that we go to as tourists are reflections of values that need to be critically examined. And what is my impact on the world when I go out as a tourist, right? COVID has taught us, for example, and I'm no expert in this, but I just to throw something out there for people to think about. The COVID pandemic has highlighted the economic stakes of the game in tourism. So countries that are virtually dependent on tourism dollars have suffered enormously under COVID. In Europe, in Western Europe, countries like Italy and Greece have been hammered by and really, really harmed by the COVID pandemic because so much of their economic well-being is dependent on tourism. And similarly, in poorer countries that are almost 100% dependent on tourism. What about countries in the Caribbean, countries in the South Pacific, and so on that have really been hit and impacted by tourism. So the tourist's footprint, if you will, is deeply implanted in the world. It settled deeply into many countries in the world, and so it's very important, I think, to critically examine the implications of that, and that's what Professor Tegelberg does in his fourth year. The second stream in our program deals with issues that will affect us all as citizens and as people, members of the population, the global population, and that's land, food, and climate justice. And the lead faculty member in this is, again, my good friend, Professor Tegelberg, and the core course in this is his second year course, Representing Climate Change, where he begins to talk about the ways in which climate change is understood and represented in the media and in knowledge and in social science generally. And let's not be quaint about this or coy about this, I should say. We are all going to face a very, very serious crisis due to global warming and climate change on this planet. and it is going to change the way we live fundamentally. So what are some of the questions that we raise in the face of this? Right now, of course, we're still fighting with climate change deniers. You know, the United States just finished 4 years of the president who didn't believe it and thought there was such a thing as clean coal. I don't know what that looks like, but we're still grappling with the facts of the matter that this is happening, never mind planning about what to do about it. So we offer a number of courses in ISS that are really dedicated to bringing up various aspects of this problem. So, for example, climate change is going to have a devastating effect on our health. So we offer a course in the second year, 2150, Health and Crisis Issues of Health, Environment, and Poverty. Who suffered the most from the COVID pandemic? If you take out the United States, which was a particular function of political idiocy, poor countries suffered more, right? In most of the poorer countries in the world, we will never know how many people died from COVID. Even in relatively advanced economies such as Brazil, we'll never know how many people really died from COVID, because so many people are impoverished. They're living in Brazil, they call them favelas, right? In Latin America, they're called barrios, in slums, and they just disappear. And the pandemic is not really related to climate change, although it is in a way. It's got to do with habitat erosion and so on, but that's a different story. But what are we going to do when climates change and so radically that people are facing increased risks of cancers, exposure to sun, all of these sorts of things, and then in poor countries it gets worse. We also, in conjunction with our urban studies program, offer city lives and city forums. Because on one hand, the city, if you think about the city of Toronto, one of the largest urban areas in North America, it's a huge polluter. But it's also one of the most important sites for addressing climate change. How can cities change? I can remember, and not too long ago, David Suzuki, back in the 1980s and 90s, before some of you were even born, he was arguing for increased urban density. The idea that if you want to solve the climate problem, increase urban density so people don't have to travel so much for work. I wonder if that's still relevant today, right? We can build skyscrapers, but those skyscrapers have to be heated. They have to have, they have significant impacts on the land. I mean, one wonders if that is still the go-to resolution to greenhouse gas emissions. We also, in conjunction with our international development studies program, offer development in comparative and historical processes. Right, climate change is a product of modernization. And we associate modernization with progress, but progress comes at a price. And that price is often paid in developing countries. And so we include this course so that people understand, again, that the impact of climate change is differential. It affects different countries in different ways. And then we offer a couple of other courses. Again, my colonialism course is in here, and then also another course, Technology and Social Movements, which again looks at technological innovation, the impacts of technological innovation. In terms of the fourth year capstone in this stream, we have a generic capstone course, Soc 4000, but a particular version of that, topics in social science research, land and food, where in those instances where we can where we have a person with that expertise available, we have made room for them to do an advanced course on the problem of land and food. Then we have Professor Tegelberg's critical issues in tourism studies, which again, I've already talked about. And another course which is kind of unique and interesting, but I don't know how often we'll be offering it. And that is this course by Professor Annette Bickford, who is an anthropologist and does some very interesting research on ethnographic research or lived experience research. And she has a course called Human Zoos, Spectacle and Politics of Spectatorship. And it's, again, this idea that think about sporting events, right? Sporting events are spectacles, right? Whether it's I think the Super Bowl is coming up, so the Super Bowl or a car race or something, and they're massive gatherings of people, and they're also expressions of social values. So we look at some of those as well. Now, just very quickly, the third stream is a stream that I think students would find somewhat intimidating because it is rooted in social theory, but it's one that students will find themselves gravitating to as they get started in their reading. Because the wonderful thing about theory, and this stream is called Social Theory and Method, the wonderful thing about theory is that the only thing constraining a theory are the questions asked by the theorist, right? It's a very open-ended way of thinking about big questions. So one of the most popular, of course, is questions of justice. What is justice, right? This starts with Socrates, and that question's been with us for thousands of years. And so in this instance, I should say, all students in the second year will take Soc 2000, which is our social science methods course. So you will be introduced to methods in the second year. And then we encourage people, no matter what streams you're following, we encourage people to take at least one theory course so that you begin to, not because you have to know the theories, but so that you learn how to deal with theoretical material. And we have 3 of those courses in the second year. We have Ideology in Everyday Life, taught by my friend and colleague John Similides. We have 2570, which is Human Nature and Political Thought, which is sometimes taught by Professor Perseram, sometimes taught by a contract faculty, and maybe in the future sometimes taught by me. And then 2571, Introduction to Social and Political Thought, which is a basic survey of social and political thought. The so-called, well, it's not really Plato to NATO, but when I was an undergraduate, we used to call it that. We don't do Plato to NATO, but we do a survey of modern social thinking. And then from there, we look at, in third year, we offer increasingly advanced courses in theoretical thinking. So we have Radical Ideas and Ideologies in the Modern Age, right? With a particular focus, I think, on modern revolutionary thinking and postmodernism. We have Professor Perseram teaches an advanced course in post-colonial theory, which dovetails very nicely on both of my course and her course on colonialism. We have other courses, Western Theories of the Other, which also ties in nicely with the colonial and post-colonial thought. Professor Jay Goulding, who is a brilliant theorist. I he's interesting to talk to. You have to really pay attention. But he's very interested in China. And so he teaches a course called Social and Political Thought, East Meets West. What are the commonalities and differences between Chinese social thought and Western social thought? Right? We often think that there's a very hard boundary between the way people think about the world in China and the way the West thinks. But that animus, if you will, is really a product of global politics more than it is of culture and human thought. And Professor Goulding tries to bring those two together in this course. I've already mentioned subjectivities of the subaltern. And then we have a third course. We have several courses here, but the final course is the political economy and moral science. So this course, which I find fascinating, is again one of those fundamental courses. It sounds highfalutin, right? Political economy and moral science. But let's remember that the term political economy came out of the moral thought of philosophers, primarily in the 17th and 18th centuries. So this is very much looking at the relationship between one's moral obligations and one's desires to succeed in life materially. And so it touches fundamentally on the issue of justice. Right. I often think of a book I read when I was an undergraduate by a fellow named Hirschman called The Passions and the Interest. Right. We plan our careers based on our interests, but we make moral choices based on our passions and our desires. And those two sometimes clash with each other. And the topic of political economy, the topic of moral economy is really about how to reconcile my passions and my interests. I love that book by Hirschman because it laid it out rather simply. Now, Hirschman's a very conservative sort, to be sure. I mean, this isn't Marxism 101 or anything, but he identified an element of human nature and he identified it in a unique way and made this really interesting argument. In terms of the fourth year capstones, if you're really ambitious about theory, you could take Professor Goulding's Phenomenology of the Social Sciences, where you will learn lots about people like Heidegger. And of course, having taken his earlier courses, you'd be well prepared for that. My fourth year course, Skepticism and Social Inquiry, is here. That course is really about addressing the phenomenon of living in a post-truth world. What are the implications after 30 years of anti-intellectualism, after 30 years of a movement to relativize truth? Does truth matter anymore? And if it does, how do we know what truth is? And it's loaded with problems that. And finally, we have a fourth year capstone Social and Political Thought seminar, which is a seminar that's taught by different faculty members at different times and follows their own theoretical interests. So it would depend if Professor Purser was teaching it, it would take on one characteristic. If Professor Goulding was teaching it would take another, similarly with Professor Bickford and so on. So you can see from this sort of overview of the program that this is a very diverse program. It touches on themes, but it's also it satisfies someone who has a broad range of questions, curiosities.
Well, that was a fantastic overview. Thank you so much, Professor Baxter. I had some questions for you. So this is a huge diversity of topics, and they all really seem very sort of pertinent to the world we live in now. If you were to think about social science going back maybe 50 years ago, and how it has changed till now, what kind of changes do we see, and what do you think that sort of means for the future of the study in this field?
So that's a interesting but very tough question. But I think that and my answer is exclusively my answer, okay? Because I'm sure my colleagues would answer in a very different way. But I think that 50 years ago, the social sciences, as we understand them, were rooted very much in sort of two frameworks, okay? One framework is an analytical framework that was derived very much from formal philosophy, so logic, Enlightenment thought, and so on, which was very linear in its analysis. And the other dominant trend in the social sciences was a kind of empiricism, right? So a reliance on empirical data, statistical data, observational data. Now, those trends are still very much alive in the social sciences. But I think that one thing that our program reflects is the emergence, particularly after 1968, but the emergence in the 70s to today in much more critical perspectives that that embrace, if you will, the idea that knowledge is laden with values, so that what we think that we know is actually loaded with our interpretation of the world, right? So social science today and interdisciplinary social science, this program embraces the idea that all facts are value laden and that all facts need to be interpreted and questioned critically. And I think that criticality, that, if you will, the critical nature of social and political thought, not of social and political thought, sorry, of social science, has been something that has really emerged in the last 50 years. It's also something that has been vehemently opposed by certain power centers, if you will, within the social sciences. So I can tell you stories about going to conferences and having people who do primarily statistics stand up and say, you know, you theorists are all windbags. You don't know what you're talking about, and this is a waste of time. You're not achieving anything because you have no statistics. And I mean, these sort of methodological conflicts really emerged, and we all reconcile those things in certain ways, right? I mean, in our own ways, and that's why theory is important, because theory mediates that conflict between facts and values. One orders one's facts according to a theoretical framework. That's how is and ought, fact and value come together. And our program, ISS, really embraces that in a multitude of different ways.
Yeah, you know, this is really a fascinating topic for me as I listen to the different areas in which this application of sort of fact and value through the different courses you've talked about. I get more and more interested about learning about this topic, and I'm certain I'm not alone. I'm sure there are students who are watching this who are also very interested. Either they have a passion for this sort of information, or maybe they're developing one as they're learning more. But students always have this kind of balance, I find, where they get I like to say they're kind of seduced by the practical, where they start to think, well, I need a degree that I'm going to be able to apply to a job. But I think there are a lot of skills that they can build in a social science degree. And I was wondering, if you were to talk to someone who has a passion for social science, what kind of skills and opportunities do you think lie before them after they've completed the degree? Maybe a kind of reassurance that this is a good path for them to take.
Well, let me start off by offering a bit of advice. And I mean, I see it too, right? We do the campus days and people come with their parents, and their parents want to know, what job can you get when you come out with this degree and so on. And I tell parents, and I'll tell students as well, incoming students, look, don't get trapped in the myth, what I call the myth of credentialization, right? A credential is not going to get you a job. If you manage somehow to get accepted to a business school or something, and you eke your way through it with a C average, and it's an exercise in misery, that hardly prepares you for a career in business, right? So what matters, I think, for students is to get skilled, right? So I heard an interview not too long ago with the head of one of these business groups. And I can't remember the name of it now. I wish I'd thought about it earlier, but it was either somebody from the Board of Trade in Toronto or somebody from an industrial group. And here's what they said. They said something very interesting. He said, people in the private sector want people who can think. They don't care how you learn to think, just that you can think. Because pick your industry, whatever industry you find yourself in, from insurance to car manufacturing. If you are joining the ranks of the professional class, the particular industry, company, business in which you are working will train you and teach you what you need to know about the techniques of doing that business. You need to be able to think your way through it. And what ISS offers is an opportunity to hone your thinking skills, your critical skills, your writing skills, your skills at interpretation and managing new things, managing new information. It offers all of those. And a student coming out of ISS will be an incredibly well-read student with a very broad breadth of knowledge. And that should give them the confidence to take on any task they face.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't, we're not training. If you want to be an engineer, go to engineering school, right? But in the social sciences and the humanities, we don't train engineers, right? This isn't about physics. We train people who think, who can take on just about anything.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to be an engineer, you could go to engineering school afterwards, because you're not afraid of the knowledge anymore. What ISS does is it demystifies learning. It demystifies this idea that knowledge is somehow up here in the ether and we can barely reach it, right? No, it's everywhere around us, and let's celebrate it and embrace it and learn how to use it, right, as citizens.
Oh, that's absolutely. And I think a lot of our graduates from the program go on to great success, and that speaks volumes for the great foundation they're given in the ISS program.
They go to law school, and sometimes they go on. I've had students go into social work. I've had students go into law school and other professional schools. And what the reason they're successful is they're quick on their feet. They learn how to be quick on their feet. They learn how to learn. And that is the key to moving on.
Well, and I think you've talked a lot about your colleagues and some of their areas of study, and that's giving them a very broad basis for knowledge, because you don't know exactly what's going to be your area of career once you leave. And so having that breadth of knowledge is probably a huge asset for them. I was wondering if there were any other colleagues you wanted to highlight that maybe you didn't get a chance to mention, or particularly colleagues that might be people they're meeting in their first year, because that can be a very important year for students.
So unfortunately, ISS doesn't have its own foundations course.
Okay.
So we encourage students to take one of the social science 1000 courses. So for students coming in next year, one of our ISS colleagues will be teaching the 9-credit Soc 1000. So Professor Delacour, who is an expert in health and society and disability studies, will be teaching one section of Soc 1000. So it'd always be a good idea to take her course. The other course that we encourage people to take is Soc 1140, which again is a foundations course. It's a 9-credit course. And it's called Self, Culture, and Society. And eventually, as we revise our curriculum, we're hoping to make a version of that course our core first year course. But for now, it still falls under the social science gen eds. And that course, I'm not too sure who's going to be teaching it next year. So I can't really say much about it. Because it just depends on how things work out, but it will be probably a contract instructor. What I do as undergraduate program director is before I'm outgoing at the end of June, I will make sure that that person is hired, and I will have a talk with them about the relationship between that course and ISS.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the importance of ISS in general. You mentioned it was a general education course. It is one of the requirements for all students in our faculty to take a course from your department in the form of to become familiar with these. And I think that speaks to how important social science is generally to a well-rounded education.
It's a big department. I mean, every year it's interesting because if you count all of our gen eds, every year over 12,000 students go through our department.
Wow.
Yeah. And we are working very hard in social science to really improve the first year experience, because so many of York's undergraduates, about a fifth of all the undergraduates that come through York, about a fifth of everyone in LANPS, I'm sorry, we have 26,000 students and we have about 50% then, I guess, right? Come through our department in the first year, and we are working really, really hard to make that first year experience a really meaningful one for all of them.
And I think that's a big way that students, because social sciences get covered in a different way, I think, in high school. And the discovery of the sort of university level of thought in social science is something that can be, a revelation for students. We get a lot of program change requests after taking that first course. But I hope that we've convinced some people who might be watching this with an interest that this could be a place for them. And I was wondering, I get a lot of questions from parents and from students how they can prepare for their first year at university. And for someone who's interested in coming into social science, do you have any recommendations for maybe there's a book or something they could do to prepare themselves for the upcoming first year?
Well, yes, I think there's a couple of things that I would do if I were thinking about ISS. The first thing I would do is read whatever I could get my hands on. So, I mean, if I had a child who, if I thought that I was going to start in ISS, I'm going to start with my gen ed and social science and so on. The way I would prepare over the summer was I would start reading higher level popular material. So I would start reading things like The Atlantic, The New Republic, what is the Canadian equivalent of the Atlantic? I don't
The
even know.
walrus, is it?
The walrus. Thank you. I was right on the tip of my tongue. Start reading, and the reason I say that is that those publications like that are composed and comprised of essayists, and these are people who make their living writing essays. And so the best thing that you could do to prepare for social science is to read essays. And don't go, don't get too crazy about it. I'm sure that people here were saying, well, go read, I don't know, something from Marx, or go read Plato or something like that. No, forget about that. You'll just get lost in the text. Let us help you get started with the really highfalutin stuff. Learn what an essay looks like in the modern world by reading essays. Read good writers, and that will improve your writing, your thinking, and your reading. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is instead of pick it. If you have issues that you're interested in, start looking for books about them. So, for example, I just finished, so at bedtime, I always read myself to sleep because it's the only way I get to sleep, which is kind of counterintuitive because you're not supposed to do that if you want to sleep well. But I'm reading 2 books at bedtime right now. And this is just an example of the kind of things. And these are not like deep academic books. One book that I just finished is called The Coming Civil War, and it was written by an author from Toronto who spends most of his career in the United States. It was a wonderfully written book that discussed 5 possible scenarios in which the United States could descend into another civil war, given the fractures of that society. And I thought that it was a wonderful read. Was it a deep scholarly social science? No, it wasn't intended to be. It was a think piece, a speculative piece that I read for fun, but also brought some questions up for me. The other book that I'm reading, which is a collection of essays, is called Archaeology Ontario. And that book I find really interesting, given my interest in First Nations peoples, because it's a collection of essays by archaeologists who have worked in Ontario. And it's a wonderful book because it talks about all of the major sites that have been discovered and how archaeologists make inferences from what they discover about social structures. It talks a lot about human occupancy of the Great Lakes area after the ice ages, and is surprisingly accessible for a non-archaeologist. It's not technical in that sense, but I'm reading all sorts of things that I never knew about before, about the first occupants of this province. Why? Because I'm interested in it. Will I ever be able to use it in my workplace? Well, actually, the Archaeology Ontario, I will be able to, but would it be relevant to my workplace? No, but I'm interested in it. It's well written. It's again, I'm learning by following my interests. So follow your interests and just read. Do not just say, okay, school's out at the end of June and drop your books and forget about it. Just keep your mind operating so that you don't come in and it's like starting all over again in September, right? In a whole new environment, in classes that you have to experience, right? You're going to a lecture hall with 300 other people and a tutorial with 25. You've never done that before. So keep your mind working, get ready for it that way, and then come and give yourself time to adjust to a much bigger context, right? A much bigger experience than what you would have experienced in high school.
Oh, that's fantastic advice, and I really love follow your interest, because I think
Yeah.
that could be a maxim for all students
Yep.
coming into our faculty. Well, I want to thank you, Professor Baxter, for your time today and exploring the interdisciplinary social science program with us. For those of you at home, thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about liberal arts professional studies and our program in interdisciplinary social science. I want to remind you that if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at goyork@yorku.ca. You don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at YorkULAPS. And applications are still open for some students who will be watching this. So please don't hesitate to apply. The sooner you apply, the more likely the chance that you'll get exactly the courses you want and be able to enroll in some of the more interesting courses we've heard about. Professor Baxter, I always turn things over to our guests for any final words of advice for students who are going to be joining us for next year.
Well, thank you. And I'll just say one thing very briefly, to the extent that I'm ever brief in anything I say. And that is that you're about to start your education, 4 years here at York. And there's two things I want to say. One is, forget about everything you've heard about York in popular media and stuff. This is a wonderful university. I love this university. I've been here since 2005. When I came here, I remember when I joined the criminology program, the head of the program at the time was this fantastic woman, Professor Kellogg, who has retired years ago. She retired. And at the end of my first year, I loved it. So I really wanted to stay, right? How can I stay at York? And she had this sort of gravelly Rosemary Clooney kind of voice, and she kind of looked at me and she said, well, Paul, I wasn't too sure about you when you came here, but you're okay. And I said, okay, good. Now I have a chance to stay here. So, this is a wonderful place, and it will be what you make it. And I can tell you this, every single one of my colleagues is only interested in your success. We want you to do well. We want you to learn. So come and join us in that process. Second thing I want to say to you is that when you come to university, you have 4 years of freedom. You're free for 4 years. They might be the last 4 years of your life where you are completely free to ask any questions you want. Don't give up the opportunity to ask those questions and embrace that freedom. Workaday life will come along after. You just want to make yourself the best person you can be while you're here at York, to go out into that world and take it on. And I hope to see hundreds of you coming to join us in ISS in the next couple of years. So for now, thank you for your time. Be well. I always tell my students, especially in the pandemic, it's more important than ever that we all be kind to one another, that we take care of one another, be patient, and be understanding. So take care of yourselves through the winter, and hopefully I'll see you all here next fall. Thank you very much.